Is this going to be on? بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم فقد نوينا التعلم وتعليم وتذكر والتذكير والنفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة نبيه والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على الخير وكل ما نواه مشايخنا ابتغاء وجه الله وثوابه وقربه اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما نافعا يا كريم. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on the Mukhtasar of Imam al-Quduri alayhi rahmatullahi ta'ala wa nafa'ana bihi, we have reached the final chapters of the book of prayer, which involve the chapter of the martyr, the shahid, and the chapter of prayer in the Kaaba. And then, inshallah, bi'ithnillahi ta'ala, we will move on after that to the book of Zakat. Today we'll just be doing an introduction to the Zakat, inshallah ta'ala. So the first thing, the first discussion, sorry, 1 second. The first discussion is the martyr. Now, the shahid, the word shahid comes from the root word shahida. Shahida means to witness. So shahid, the scholars have linguistically looked at it and they've come up, either it means shahid bi ma'na mashhud, that it's the one being witnessed, meaning the one who everyone is a testimony to their shahada, to their being a martyr, or shahid bi ma'na shahid, or shahid being the one who is witnessing, meaning the active participle, is the one, meaning the one who is witnessing the angels and so forth. But the meaning is there, right? So that's the linguistic meaning. It comes from the word to witness, shahida, the same word that you say when I ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, I bear witness that there's no God but Allah. Right? So shahid is translated in English as a martyr. Now, there's a lot of kind of confusion around the idea of the martyr due to current events and people who are portraying something of the religion that is not from it, or claiming to be acting on behalf of the religion. So the definition of the true martyr must be really understood, because the Prophet ﷺ, he was asked about a person who fights to be called brave, a person who fights in a battle, in a war, in a battle between the Muslims and the disbelievers, and meaning not just those who disbelieve, but those who disbelieve and are actively trying to stop the Muslims from believing. So it's a specific type of disbelief, not just the one who sits back and says, I don't believe, but you can do whatever you want, not that type. So this goes back to the discussion of jihad and what is true jihad. So the shaheed is the one who died in a true jihad. That's this. You can summarize it that way. So the Prophet was asked, there's a person who dies in the battle, but his reason for being there, for fighting, is to be called brave. The second one dies in the battle, but the reason for fighting in that battle was for the war spoils, the ghanima. And then he mentioned a few others, and he says, ayyuhum fi sabilillah. Which of these people is really for the sake of Allah? Which of these people is shaheed? Which of these people is a true martyr? right? The Prophet ﷺ, he did not respond directly to the specific examples given in the question. He gave a principle. He said, "Man qatala li takuna kalimatullahi hiya al-ulya fahuwa fi sabilillah." Whoever fights so that the statement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes the highest and most loftiest, then they are in the path of Allah. Right? Meaning, the one who only fights, the only reason, and not like only meaning most of their reasons, that's the biggest reason. No. That they have zero reasons besides it being for the sake of Allah. That is 100% for the sake of Allah, with no self-interest involved whatsoever. Whether it be politics, whether it be land, whether it be money, whether it be war spoils, whether it be fame, whether it be status, whether it just be because they want a place to vent their anger. All of that has nothing to do with jihad. The only thing that is called true jihad, in its proper context, with its proper conditions, with its proper rules, right? There's the rules of engagement that are applied, that Islam has raised the standard of, right? Only in that situation, right? In that situation, only if the intention is 100% pure for Allah is that person a martyr. Right? So we'll be discussing the legal implications of that in today's class, inshaAllah ta'ala. Right? So when we talk about the word, the martyr, the shahid, generally it's spoken about in regards to the law in three different ways. Right? And this is because the law of Islam is restricted to only that which is apparent, right? And it does not delve into hidden matters, the unseen matters of the heart. Right? So the law may tell about intentions, but it does not judge intentions, right? Specifically, right? In all circumstances. Right? It'll just say, if your intention is this, then that. Right? But it can't say that your intention is wrong. We don't know that. Right? So the three ways that the shaheed is categorized is, the first and foremost is the actual shaheed. Right? The true shaheed, the true martyr, in the Islamic perspective, is the one who is considered a martyr in this world and in the next. The basis of this chapter is the martyrs of the Battle of Uhud. Right? The rulings of who is a martyr, what to do with the martyr, right? and how to treat them when burying them, shrouding them, and praying upon them afterwards. Right? All of that is taken from the situation or the circumstance of the Battle of Badr and what the Prophet ﷺ did to the people who died in that battle. Right? Now, this is from Badr because the legislation was not there at the time prior to that. Right? So the asl, the basis of all the rulings, right, are the martyrs of Badr, of Uhud, sorry. Right? So what was the situation of the martyrs of Uhud? Right? First, they were killed, right, wrongfully. They were wrongfully killed. Right? Second, they were killed with sharp weapons. Right? They were killed with instruments that are meant for killing. That's a better way to say it. They were killed with instruments that are meant for killing. Okay? They were killed in a way that they themselves were already in a state of ritual purity, meaning they were not in a state of major ritual impurity. Right? It's not about whether you have wudu or not. Right? If you're in need of a ghusl, there's certain separate rulings, because these people, right, the martyrs of Uhud, were not in need of ghusl. Okay? They were adults. They were baligh. They were not children. The Prophet ﷺ, he vetted those who wanted to volunteer for the battle, and he did not allow the children. Right? Unless they were mature, then he did not allow them. Right? And then on top of that, due to their death, there was no financial recompense obligatory. Right? And we'll explain that one in a moment. Right, so these are the people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, لا يحسبن الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله أموات. Right? Do not think that those who were killed in the path of Allah, in the way of Allah, are dead. Rather, they are alive with their Lord being provided. Right, so the virtues and the merits that apply to the martyr apply to the martyr who is a martyr in the next life, who is considered a martyr with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right, and they are the ones who, as we are going to mention. And then the second verse is وَلَا تَقُولُوا لِمَنْ يُقْتَلُ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتٍ. Right, the first is don't think that they're dead. The second is don't say that they're dead. Right, rather they are alive, and you do not perceive it. Right, so the life of the martyr, right, is the life of the barzakh. Right, the barzakh being the intermediary world between this life and the hereafter. That they are in the barzakh, but their life in the barzakh has a distinguishment from the lives of everyone else. And some of it is mentioned in the hadith about the souls being able to travel through paradise and so forth. Right? And those are realities that are unseen to us, that Allah has blessed them with due to their ultimate sacrifice. Right? And it is the sign of ultimate faith and ultimate sacrifice, right? That you sacrifice the only, right, your essential possession, which is your life, right, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right, with no other interest involved. Right? And rare is that reality. Whoever claims it, right, and that claim is only known, whether it's true or not, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Anybody can say, I'm doing it for Allah, but really there's power and money and, right, gas and oil and lots of things that human beings are enamored by. Right, so that's the first type. That's the one who is considered a martyr in this world, meaning that the Muslims will treat them as a martyr in regards to the rulings of burial and prayer. And they are also a martyr in the next life, meaning that they will be resurrected on the Day of Judgment as martyrs, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the intention was sincere, that they died for His sake only. Okay, the second type is those who are martyrs in this world but not in the next. Now this is interesting. If a person dies in a battle, right, and we'll talk about the ways that a person can be a martyr, because it's not restricted only to that. Right, the person dies in a battle. Right, they are wrongfully killed with an object that is generally intended to use, that generally used to kill. They were in a state of purity. They were adults, and there is no blood money due to their death, right, because of their death. But their intention was for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We, as the Muslims, we treat them in regards to the rulings of the martyr in this world. Right, so we bury them and we shroud them and we bury them as a martyr, right, as if they are a martyr. But on the Day of Judgment, they will be raised, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what's in their hearts, and they will not be a martyr on that day. And we talk, and there are hadith about this, that the first three people who are brought on the Day of Judgment are the scholar, I believe the word is the qari, the reciter, the martyr, and the generous person. And Allah will ask all three of them, why did you do what you did? And they will say that we did it for your sake, O Allah. And Allah will say, you lied. That you did it so that the people will call you brave, and they have said that. Right, so go seek your reward from them. Right, and there are other narrations. Right, so we act as if they're martyrs, but Allah knows best their intentions. As the Prophet said, رُبَّ قَاتِلٍ بَيْنَ الصَّفَّيْنِ اللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ بِنِيَّتِهِ. Right, there are many people who die between the ranks of the two armies, right, and Allah knows best what their intentions were. Okay? The third is the one who is a martyr in the next world, but they are not considered a martyr in this world. Right, so this person, right, these are the ones who don't fulfill the criteria of the martyrs of Uhud. Right, so we bury them as if, right, we don't bury them according to the rules of the martyr. We bury them according to the general rules of burying another Muslim. But on the day of judgment and in the barzakh and on the day of resurrection, right, all of the merits and the bounties and the virtues of the martyr are given to them because their intention was correct for the sake of Allah. Right? However, they didn't fit the criteria of the law for us to treat them post-death as a martyr to them. Right? So those are the three types. Right? The one who is a martyr in this world and the next. That's the martyrs of Uhud and the like. Right? Those who are martyrs in this world but not the next. Right? Those are those who are insincere, right, and had other motives involved. Right? And then the third is those who are martyrs in the next world but not in this world. Those are the ones who were for sincere, but we can't treat them that way because they didn't fulfill the criteria of the people of Uhud. Tamam. So now let's look at the rulings. So Imam al-Quduri alayhi rahmatullahi ta'ala, he says, الشهيد من قتله المشركون أو وجد في المعركة وبه أثر الجراحة. He says that the shahid, and we're talking about here the shahid of this world and the next. So these are the ones that are directly similar to the people of Uhud, the martyrs of Uhud, alayhim ridwanullahi ta'ala wa nafa'ana bihim. So the first, he says that the shahid is the one who is killed by the disbelievers. Right, so this is a battle. This is in a battle, right? Right, so they're killed by the disbeliever. Right? It was witnessed that so and so disbeliever killed that person. Okay, martyr. Right. Right. If their intention was correct, they're martyr in the next life as well. Tamam. Or they were found in the battlefield, wounded, right? And there's a sign of a wound that would lead to death, that could lead to death. Right. So if they have a wound or they're bleeding out, right, from places that are not normally bled out from, or places that if blood comes out from it, it's a sign that one could die from that. Like, as the scholars, they mention blood coming out from the ears, for instance. Not the blood coming out from the mouth, because someone can punch you in the mouth and you're bleeding. Right? You're not going to die from it. Or your nose, for instance. But other places. So there's a sign that they were wounded in a deadly manner. Tamam. Okay, so even though we didn't see the actual killing, it's assumed that they were killed by the opposite side. Okay, so that's one way, that's one type, right? That's directly related to the people of Uhud. But there's another type that's added to that. He says, أو قتله المسلمون ظلما ولم تجب بقتله دية. Right? Or they were wrongfully killed by Muslims. Right, so a Muslim killing another Muslim, right? They were wrongfully killed by Muslims, right? And their death does not necessitate blood money or any financial retribution. Tamam. Now that needs some unpacking. Right? First of all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that whoever intentionally kills a Muslim, right, فَجَزَاؤُهُ جَهَنَّمْ, then their reward is the hellfire. Right? So and خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا, right, to live in there forever. Our beloved teacher Habib Ali al-Mashhur alayhi rahmatullahi ta'ala, he mentioned that even though it is not the belief of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah that committing a sin causes disbelief, right? Right? But this verse says that the Muslim who intentionally kills another Muslim, that their reward is eternal hellfire. Right? Right? He said that one of the greatest causes of a person losing their faith and dying on disbelief, right, thus earning eternal hellfire, right, is to kill another Muslim intentionally. Right, shedding blood of the Muslim. Right, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Sabbul Muslim fusuq wa qatluhu al-kufr." Right, that accusing or deriding another Muslim is corruption, and killing them is disbelief. Now, don't quote me direct. Don't Right? Don't get ahead of yourselves. Right? Killing them is not disbelief itself. It's not that they are no longer Muslim, but rather it is an action that would be done by a disbeliever, not a believer. A Muslim would not kill another Muslim. And it's very a shame, it's very unfortunate that we have people who are claiming to be the defendants of the true faith, right? The revivers of the caliphates, but the victims at the hand of such a wretched ideology, right, are more so on the side of the Muslims themselves than anyone else. Right? They kill more Muslims than anyone. Right? What kind of deen is that? What kind of religion is that? Right? They destroy masjids, they destroy places that are deemed, right, honored and revered. Right? Right? So, right, whoever is killed wrongfully, right, a Muslim who was killed wrongfully, and their death does not necessitate any blood money. Now, what does that last part mean? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us, prior to the verse that we just quoted, that if a Muslim kills another believer unintentionally, accidentally, right, then they have to free a slave or give blood money to the family. Right? And the details are there in the Quran. Right? So if a Muslim kills another Muslim accidentally, there's blood money due. Right? And likewise, if a Muslim kills a non-Muslim accidentally, then there's blood money due. Right, so if the Muslim is killed by other Muslims, right, wrongfully, meaning they didn't deserve it. Right? So what is that? Right? That excludes the capital punishment, the Hajj punishments. It also excludes qisas. Qisas is retribution, that this person killed a person of another tribe, right? And then, right, it is done back to them as a retribution, right? A life for a life, right? Unless they forgive and so forth. Those are separate issues that we'll take in later chapters. Right? So that's not considered wrongful death, right? Rather that's the manifestation of their full repentance in this world, as we see in the hadith of the woman who confessed of her own fornication, and the Prophet said that had her repentance been spread upon the whole city, it would have sufficed all the people's sins to them. Right? So if a Muslim kills another Muslim accidentally, there's blood money due. That person is not a shahid. That person is not a shahid, even though their death was wrongful. I mean, they didn't deserve it, obviously. Right? It was wrongful death, but there is a recompense in this world for it. So that is not considered the shahid. They may be shahid in the next life, but in this life we don't treat them as shahid. Right? Wrongful death, that would include an accident, right? Accidental death, but it also includes a death that occurred at the hands of another person, right, who actively harmed them, but they harmed them with a weapon or an instrument that is not normally used to kill. Right? So say, for instance, two Muslims are fighting. Right? And right, Muslim A gets really angry, picks up a rock and throws it at Muslim B. Right? Right, can you kill somebody with a rock? Yes, but is that can we assume that was his intention? Not necessarily. Right? So in that situation, even though the action was intentional, right, the intention of killing was not necessarily there. So in that situation, blood money would be due. It would be considered an accident. Right? It would be considered. So it's not premeditated murder, for instance. Right? It wasn't intended. It would be a type of manslaughter. Right? According to Imam Abu Hanifa, he would have to pay blood money. Right? But that person who died is not a shaheed. Right? Is not a shaheed. Right? Because there is blood money is due because of their death to them. Are there any questions so far on that? Sidi Umar? Sidi Umar? Can I see the The screen's on, but it's not showing anything. If there's any questions on this, I would rather take it now before we continue. وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
I just have a question about what defines a weapon that is used to kill other people. Like, is that if somebody, even though we don't normally or conventionally use a certain weapon, for example, that is used to kill, but maybe a specific person might use rocks as their killing method, would that change?
The definition that is generally given is muhaddad, right, and a sharp weapon, right? However, if you take it back to the context of the time, really the only weapon that you would use to kill would be, for instance, a sword, right, or a knife, right? So it's muhaddad, something that is sharp. So something that is blunt would not necessarily be used to kill, but if it happened in the battle, regardless of whatever it is, right, the weapon condition is not for the battle. Right? It's for if they die a wrongful death at the hands of another Muslim. Right? Only in that situation is the condition of the weapon being muhaddad apply. If they're found in a battlefield burned, for instance, or they fell off a cliff, or they had these things called minjaniq or something, catapults. They had those at that time. Right? All of that would be considered shahid. Right? But if it's outside of the context of a battle and they were wrongfully killed by another Muslim intentionally, because there can't be any, so it's intentionally, and a sign of intentionally is that the weapon is muhaddad. Right? Now, the issue is a gun considered muhaddad? Right? That I haven't read anything directly about that, but most likely it would be assumed so, right? Because it has the same meaning as the muhaddad weapon. Allahu A'lam. Likewise, an arrow would be obviously muhaddad. Right? The next we're going to discuss is the second type, is the shahid in this world but not the next. Right? So this is the person who apparently looks, right, as if they died, right, as a shahid, right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, right, what their motives were, and their motives were for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we find out in the next life. Okay, so even if they are buried as a martyr, the punishments of the grave are still applied to them, right? But even though they are unseen to us. Right, so the shaheed in this world but not the next is the one who appears to be shaheed but died for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right, and we quoted the hadith already that many a fighter between the ranks, Allah knows best about their intentions. Allah knows best about their intentions. Right, and this is really important, right, because claims of martyrdom, right, and even people with this irhabi ideology, the terroristic ideology that they're somehow allowed to kill whoever they want to kill, innocent civilians, right? Claiming that they're going to be a martyr. La, abadan. You're not a martyr in this world nor in the next. And we'll talk about in a moment that even the imams don't have to pray on you, right? Just to show the world that no, we don't accept that. We don't accept. And this happened in Boston. If you know about the Boston Marathon massacre, the imams did not want to lead the janazah. Right? Some people criticize them, but we'll see the ruling in a moment. Right? That is not acceptable in our religion. And it's actually a means of stopping people from coming to our religion, or at least accepting it. The third is the shahid in the next world, but not in this world. So we don't treat them as the shahid in regards to the rulings of the funeral, the funeral rulings, but they are a shahid with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So the shahid in the next world, but not this world, is the one, right? The one who dies for the sake of Allah. So it is for the sake of Allah, right? But they die, their death does not fulfill the criteria, as we mentioned. The criteria are based on the martyrs of Uhud in regards to the battle context, and in regards to a Muslim killing another Muslim, that it was done unintentionally. If it was done unintentionally, they are not considered shaheed in this world. In the battle context is where the condition of the intention comes in, right? Because they're actively participating for a certain reason. Right? If that reason is solely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they're shaheed. Given that the battle is an Islamically sanctioned one, not just some campaign of ego and desires. So they don't fulfill the criteria. What would be the criteria that are not fulfilled? One, they could be in a state of major ritual impurity. Right? So they fulfill all the conditions, but they needed a ghusl beforehand. Now there's a khilaf on this, but in the Hanafi school, those who die in a major state of ritual impurity are washed. Their bodies are washed, as opposed to the full shaheed. And their bodies are washed and prayed upon and shrouded and buried. Right? Whereas the full shaheed, we'll talk about in a moment, right, is not washed. They are buried in their blood. And that applies to the different types of junub. Right? We'll talk about in a second. Or they were children. For instance, if the child, some of the scholars, they mentioned that if everyone's going to die, right, and the battle is just so intense that you need anybody who can hold a sword, that some scholars allowed that you can give a sword to a child and let them go, right, and let them fight. So if the child dies, right, they're not treated as a shaheed. Right? However, the rules of engagement are very clear. That no woman, no child, no non-combatant, no elder, no monk, right, no religious things none of those people are to be attacked. Right? No religious places or artifacts are to be destroyed. No crops are to be destroyed. No water is not to be poisoned. Crops are not to be burned. None of that is allowed. Right, but if so some of that will come again in the thing. Right? There's one extra thing that will take them out from being a shaheed, which is called ارتثاث, which we'll talk about at the end. So shrouding and washing. Right? As you see on the slide, right? Shrouding and washing. We took already the rulings of the regular janazah, of how to shroud and how to wash the body. The burial is the same throughout. The burial is no different, except that there's one issue, that if there's multiple bodies and you only have one space, then you can put more than one body in one grave. But the one who is most knowledgeable should be given preference in regards to the lahad, and the little cutouts in the grave. So the shaheed, in regards to the shaheed, shrouding and washing is a little bit different, right? So the shaheed of this world, right now, we only mentioned this world, not the next, because the burial happens in this world. Right? They'll be resurrected according to whether they apply to shaheed of the next world or not. Right? So the shaheed of this world, right, they are preyed upon, but they're not washed. They are not washed. They are buried in their blood. Right? But there's an exception. They are buried in their blood and not washed if they are mukallaf tahir. mukallaf, meaning that they are adults. They are an adult, they're not a child. Right? And they're tahir, meaning that they're not in a state of janaba. Right? If they are a child, or they're in a state of major ritual impurity, such as a woman who is menstruating, even if she already reached 3 days of her menstruation. Because as we took in the chapter of menstruation, what is the minimum menstruation? Anyone? The minimum menstruation is 3 days. Okay, so if she only had her menstruation for 1 day, we don't know. Would it have continued if she died, or would it have stopped there and just been istihada? Right. So she's only considered in a state of major ritual impurity, right? If her menstruation already reached 3 days, so we know for a fact that it's menstruation and not istihada. Istihada is not a major ritual impurity. Right. So she would be washed. She would not be washed if she had istihada, if it was less than 3 days. The same if she was in a state of nifas, right? In a state of nifas, even if it hasn't stopped, even if it's before the blood stopped, right? Right. So in those situations, the person will be washed. The person will be washed. Now, one of the hadith is of a man who recently got married, and the day of which the consummation of the marriage happened, immediately there was a call to go for the battle, and he died in that battle. So right after consummating the marriage, he went for the battle, right? And the Prophet ﷺ smiled because he saw the angels coming, but then he saw the Hur Ain washing his body. Right? So there was a washing that happened. Right? In this hadith, there is a washing. Right? So, right? So for that reason, they didn't wash him again, right? But he was washed. Right? Okay. Yeah, I think it was the angels. Yeah, but the Prophet turned away. Yeah, the hadith, I think I may have misquoted slightly, but the point is there. Apologies. Right, so if they died in a state of major ritual impurity, that applies to the menstruating woman who already reached 3 days, or they died as a child, right? Now, as far as the shroud, right, we mentioned that they are shrouded, right? However, they are shrouded in their own clothes, the clothes in which they died in. The only thing that is done is that the clothes are added to or subtracted from, right, in accordance to what would be best, right, as a substitute for a kafan, for an actual shroud. Right, so clothes that are not meant, right, cannot be for the shrouding purpose are removed. Like if they had chainmail, or they had armor helmets, or they had swords, or right, they had a helm, or whatever it may be. Then those are removed because they're extra. La yasluh lil kafan. They are not appropriate as a shroud. Right? But if they have, right, but if they had less than what a shroud would require, then it's added to. So if the person went out in just the basic izar and a qamis, right, but it doesn't cover their whole body, right, then you would add to that to cover the rest of the body, but you would leave those clothes on. Right, so the shroud is still happens, but with the specifics that we mentioned. Second, the shahid's blood is not washed away. They're not washed at all. Right? They're not washed as the washing of the funeral, but even the blood is not removed. Right? So they're not cleaned, you can say. Right? They're not washed ritually as a ritual bath, nor are they cleaned. Right? The blood remains as it is, right? And the Prophet said that they are raised on the Day of Judgment. Damuhu that their blood, lawnuhu ka lawnid, what is it? That their blood their wounds will be with their blood will still be flowing on the Day of Judgment. They'll be raised, and their wounds will still be bleeding, and the smell of the blood will be like misk. Right? And part of the meaning of being a witness is that they have something to show as a proof to what they sacrifice for the sake of Allah on the Day of Judgment. Right? So when Allah asks, "What did you do for my deen?" they will show their wounds, like Hamza radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Right? So the clothing is not removed unless there is something that is on the body that is not appropriate as a shroud, like armor, right, chainmail, and so forth. One last thing that disqualifies the martyr from being a martyr in this world. It does not disqualify them from being a martyr in the next world, right? But from being considered a martyr in this world is called ارتثاث. ارتثاث, right, is when something occurs to the person prior to their death that would be considered a quality of living people, not of the dead or those who are about to die. Right? So if any of the qualities of the living apply to the person prior to their death, then they are not considered shahid in this world. They are shahid only in the next world. Right? This is similar to the issue of the woman who has menstruation, right? But one of the rulings of the women who are in a state of purity apply to her. I wonder if you guys can remember what this is. I'll just say it. The woman, if her menstruation finishes, okay, in order for her to have intercourse, she has to take a bath, correct? Okay, right. That is, unless it was a full 10 days. Right. If it's less than 10 days, she has to take a bath. Now, if she doesn't take a bath, right, does that mean that the husband can never have intercourse with her until the Day of Judgment? No. Right? If a whole prayer time goes out, right, then, right, because a prayer being qada is a ruling that only applies to women in a state of purity. And because that ruling applies to her, she's considered a woman of purity, regardless of the bath. Same thing with this. Right? These actions, as we mentioned just right now, right, these qualities apply to living people. Right? So because they apply to living people, if they ever apply to the shahid, they are considered amongst the living. Right? Therefore, there is a separation between the wound or the injury acquired in the battle, right, and their actual death. So since they died, so if they died in that battle, they're shahid. Right? Correct, right? They died in the battle, they're shahid. If something happened that would make them considered amongst the living, right, then that battle is overlooked. Right? They died not in the battle. It's considered as if they died outside of the battle. Right? Therefore, they are not considered shahid in this world, but they are shahid in the next world. Right? If it was for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So he says that if any of the qualities of the living occur to the shahid, right, prior to their death, right, the shahid is washed as normal, meaning they're given the full ritual bath, right, and they will be considered, if their intention was right for Allah, they will be considered the shahid of the next world only, not in this world. Right? Now, what are the ارتثاث? What are the qualities of living people? Eating, drinking, a tadawi, which is that they took some sort of medical treatment, a whole entire prayer time passed, but with the condition that they were in a state of consciousness. That they knew, they were conscious enough that they understood the idea of prayer times and that they would have to pray, right? Even if they didn't pray. right? Because a qada, again, is a quality of the living, right? Not a quality of a dead person. Right? And then last, if they are moved away from the battlefield, right, and they died elsewhere. They died elsewhere. With the exception that if their body was moved from the battlefield so as to preserve them from being trampled by the horses, that does not disqualify them from being shaheed in this world. Right? But if they were moved, if they were taken from the battlefield and brought to, for instance, the medical tent, right? The tent where the women are treating the wounds, or the men, or whoever. Generally, in that time, it was women. They would treat the wounds. If they were given food or drink. So we see there's many hadith about Sahaba who were offered drink at the time that they were dying, and they said, no, give it to the person next to me. And then they said, give it to the one next to me. And when they came back to the first person, right, they were already dead. And so that's shaheed in this world and the next. If they had drank the water, they'd be shaheed in the next only. Scholars have also added another point, which would be the wasiyah, to give some sort of final advices, right, or final instructions. The wasiyah is like the will, the living will, right? So if a person is about to die and they give some instructions, right, that make sure you pay my debts, or make sure you give all my books, right, to Shaykh Faraz, for instance. Right? Then that type of wasiyah is something that the living would do, and that would disqualify him as well. Some scholars have restricted that to meaning only wasiyah of worldly matters. They've excluded from it wasiyah of religious matters. And the reason is that one of the shuhada, Talha, when they came to him and they found him amongst the qutala, amongst those who were killed, that he was lying there, وَبِهِ رَمَقْ, and he was in his final breaths. He's in his final breaths. He's about to die. And he said that that if the Prophet ﷺ is harmed, وَفِيكُمْ طَرَفْ, right, and your eyes are still blinking, meaning you're still alive, even if it's a little bit, right, then you have no excuse with me in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he died. Right. Also, part of that, he said that give my salam to the Prophet and to the muhajirin and the ansar, right, and tell them that if the Prophet is harmed and they have even one breath in their body, then they have no excuse. They have no excuse with me in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment, right? But he is considered a shaheed, right? And that was an advice regarding religious matters. Right? So some scholars, they excluded the religious advices from disqualifying the person from being a shaheed in this world. Tamam. Right? So all of this you can see. We see Ja'far Ja'far al-Tayyar, he passed away. As he was passing away, he had both of his arms cut off, and he was holding the flag, the banner, with his elbows. They offered him water. He said, I'm fasting, right, and I want to make my iftar in Jannah, right? And part of the reason for turning that down is to be shaheed in the akhirah, in the dunya and the akhirah. Tamam. Now there is some secondary issues that Imam al-Quduri he mentions. He says, وَمَنْ قُتِلَ مِنَ الْبُغَاةِ أَوْ قُطَّاعِ الطَّرِيقِ لَمْ يُغَسَّلْ وَدُفِنَ وَلَمْ يُصَلَّ عَلَيْهِ. That whoever is killed in a had punishment, I kind of skipped a step. Whoever is killed in a had punishment. So had punishment, for instance, that they are stoned, right, for fornication, or they're killed in qisas. So they killed someone else. So the qadi, the judge, ruled that person should be killed, right, as a retribution. Right? These things have their own context and their own rulings that apply, that have to be understood, right, in our context, and that will come in later chapters. We'll talk about that, about punishments. So if they're killed like that, they're not wrongfully killed. It's not considered wrongfully killed. Okay, so they are washed and they are prayed upon. They are not considered shaheed, and that is the reason. So, the next is, Imam Quduri says, whoever amongst the rebels or the brigands are killed, right, then they are not washed, they are buried, and they are not prayed upon. Right, so these are the rebels are those who rebel against the leader. Right? In a general sense, they rebel against the leader. Right? If they die in the process, they are not washed, they are not, and they are not prayed upon, but they're just buried. The reason is that the Prophet ﷺ prohibited rebelling against the leader, and one of the wisdoms is that bad government is better than no government. And that's just the general wisdom that some have mentioned. Tamam. Right, so this similar ruling is applied to people who like terrorists, who suicide bombers. It can be applied to them to kill other people. And this is the ruling that was taken by many of the imams in the Boston area after the Boston Marathon. Right, because those people were wrongfully killed by this person claiming to be living for Islam, right, which is, nothing in Islam allows the killing of non-combatant innocent people, ever. Right, and the Prophet said, "Man ada dhamiyan, fa ana khasmuhu yawm al-qiyamah." Whoever even shows enmity toward a non-Muslim under the Muslim's care, right, then I am their adversary on the Day of Judgment. Tamam. And that applies to the mu'ahad as well, the person who is beneath a covenant, right, who is in the covenant. Tamam. The Imam Quduri, he talks about the one who commits suicide next. I say, whoever kills themselves, they are washed and prayed upon. Okay? The one who kills themselves intentionally, important condition. Right? The one who kills themselves intentionally. Now, the basis is people don't kill themselves intentionally. That's not the norm. Okay? Right, so intentionality has to be proved without a shadow of a doubt. Okay? So if there's for instance, a suicide note, okay, now that's quite clear. But if there's not, right, then we don't assume, right, contrary to the basis. Anything that's contrary to the basis must be supported with proof. Right? Proof that shows us, brings us to a level of certainty, or ghalabat al-dhann. According to the Tarafain, which is Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad, they are washed and they are still preyed upon, right? Because even though the killing of themselves is wrong, it's sinful, right? It does not apply. It doesn't affect anyone else but themselves, right? Meaning in a killing sense. I mean, obviously, people have. It's traumatic for everyone involved, but they have wronged only themselves, right? So for that reason, they are washed and they are preyed upon. The ruling is not does not correlate to the rebel, right, whose oppression is on other people. Okay, so they're not treated as the rebel. Whereas Imam Abu Yusuf said they should not be washed or preyed upon, right, as a rebuke, right, as kind of like a lesson to others, right, just like you would rebuke and make a lesson, make an example out of the oppressor by not praying on them. And that's part of the wisdom of not praying on them, not washing them and not praying on them, is so that people don't get the idea to do it again. And there's consequences. That we're not praying on it. Right? We have nothing to do with that. That is not Islam. Right? But others have chose to pray on them, right? Seeking forgiveness for them in the next life. But that's their choice. Right? It goes back to the discretion of the people. Right, but according to Imam Abu Hanifa, that the one who commits suicide intentionally is washed and prayed upon. Is washed and prayed upon. So, any questions on the martyr chapter? We'll be moving next to the prayer in the Kaaba, inshallah. تمام.
I have a question.
تفضل. وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Can we ask forgiveness for people who committed suicide?
Yes. You can ask forgiveness for anyone who died in a state of belief. Anyone who died as a Muslim. Or anyone who died in a state of belief is better, right? Is better. Right? Anyone who died not rejecting the truth of Islam. Right? That goes back to the other criteria of who's the mukallaf in aqidah issues. Right? But anyone who is who it is clear or manifest that they died on anything else other than Islam, then generally we don't make istighfar for them. If it was somebody that you don't know what state they died upon, right, and the circumstances support the possibility of them having been Muslim, then we've directly asked about this to our teachers, and they said that you would make a dua in a conditioned phrasing. That if they died on Islam, then oh Allah, give them this, 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 and this. Right? But generally it's sinful to ask Allah to have mercy on one who died, right, in disbelief, right, because it's contrary to what Allah says in the Quran regarding His not forgiving those who die in disbelief. Right? And this is shown in the story of Ibrahim and his uncle Azar. Right? وَمَا كَانَ اسْتِغْفَارُ إِبْرَاهِيمَ لِأَبِيهِ إِلَّا مَوْعِدَةً وَعَدَهَا إِيَّاهُ. The only reason he made istighfar for his uncle Azar, right, was because he promised him he would do so, and then Allah prohibited from doing it. Right? And the reason why I say uncle is because the scholars of exegesis, they tell us that it was his uncle, not his father, because the father of Abraham is essentially the grandfather of the Prophet Muhammad, and we know that all the Prophet's fathers, parents, and ancestors were believers of monotheism. And the proof of that is at the end of the life of Ibrahim, after having been prohibited from making dua for Azar, right, at the end of his life he said, "Rabbi ighfir li wa li walidayya." Oh Allah, oh my Lord, forgive me and my parents. Walidayya is specific to parents. Ab can be used for parent, for father, or for uncle. Right? He didn't say walid. Right? He didn't say li abihi. He didn't say li walidihi. Right? Abihi is his uncle. The prayer inside the Kaaba. Is there another question?
Sorry, is it okay if I just ask?
Yeah, fadal.
Is there a time limit or some kind of time frame that's given for when, like, if that can happen, but then, like, they might have fought again, or if there was like a fatal blow that somebody received, but they didn't die right away? Like, is there some kind of time?
Yeah. So the death caused by the wound should not be separated by something of the living, by a quality of the living, right? Because that wound is part of the battle, right? And for them to be considered to die of that wound, that something could not come as a fasil, to separate, right? To interrupt that ruling. Right? So if they died hours later, but they never drank anything, they never ate anything, they didn't take medicine, they didn't leave the battle, they're just lying there, they're shahid. Right? They're shahid. But this is all just about how they're treated in this world. They're shahid in the akhirah, right? If their niyyah was for Allah. Right? They're not like, you're not stripping them of their reward, for instance. Right? That's not what's happening. Right? But as we prefaced the talk, the class, that the Sharia only deals with the zahir. It only deals with what is apparent. Is this person like the shuhada of Uhud? No, they didn't drink. Okay, we bury him as normal. The basis is that we bury people as normal. The basis is anyone who dies of the Muslims, they're washed, shrouded, and prayed upon, and buried. Right? And we would need absolute certainty, right, in order to do otherwise. So the shahid is the exception. Right? So unless they fulfill the criteria of the exception, we go back to the norm. Next, the last chapter of the book of prayer is the prayer in the Kaaba, around the Kaaba, and above the Kaaba, which is interesting. Right? He talks about all three. It's titled as the prayer of in and around the Kaaba. Prayer in the Kaaba, we know, is done by the Prophet ﷺ. He went in the Kaaba and he prayed. And our teachers described to us, right, where exactly in the Kaaba did he pray. Now this is interesting. Right? This is the level of intention, the level of attention that they paid to the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. If anyone gets the chance to pray inside the Kaaba, right, they have fulfilled one of the Sunnah of the Prophet. But to pray in the exact place that the Prophet prayed, right, is a further level of following. Right, so if this is the Kaaba, and it's not, obviously, right? Let's take this. Okay, if this is the Kaaba and this is the door, right? That the Prophet would enter the door, walk straight to the back wall, and pray just a few arms length away from that wall. So straight from the door, the wall directly adjacent to the door, across from the door. And so that's the direct place where the Prophet ﷺ prayed in the masjid. It's possible that he prayed multiple places, but that is definitely one of them. Right, that's out of our topic, but just something that I remembered. Prayer in the Kaaba is valid. It is sahih. It is valid. Whether it's an obligatory prayer or it's a voluntary prayer. There's no condition. Right? Now, if it's a group of people who enter the Kaaba and they want to pray in congregation, right, it is valid facing whichever direction you wish, right, with one exception, right, because one of the conditions of the prayer in congregation is that the imam be ahead of the followers. Right? Now, ahead or behind only applies if you're both facing the same direction. Right? So, let's go back to our example. If this is the inside of the Kaaba, right, this is the ground of the inside of the Kaaba, right, and the imam is praying to this wall, toward this wall, and you're praying to this wall, right? Even if you're closer to this wall than he is to this wall, it's still sahih. It's still valid, because closeness, right, being ahead of the imam or behind the imam, only applies that if you and the imam are facing the same wall. Right, so if you're both praying this way, but you're ahead of the imam, the prayer doesn't count. Right? You are not following the imam. You're in front of the imam. Right? So the only circumstance is that if your back is to the face of the imam, the prayer is not valid. If your back is to the face of the imam, then the prayer is not valid. Right? If your face is to the face of the imam, it's disliked, because praying in the direction of another person who's looking at you is obviously disliked, but it's still valid because you're not facing the same direction. Right? If you're praying back to back, these are really weird situations. Like, don't do these things. Right? But if you're praying back to back, it's valid. You're not facing the same direction. If you're facing this way and he's facing this way, valid. But if you're facing the same way and you're ahead of the imam, not valid. And so that's pretty much the summary of what Imam Quduri says. Right? He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, فَإِنْ صَلَّ الْإِمَامُ فِيهَا بِجَمَاعَةٍ, if the imam leads a congregation in the Kaaba, فَجَعَلَ بَعْضُهُمْ ظَهْرَهُ إِلَى ظَهْرِ الْإِمَامِ جَازَ, and some of them put their back to the back of the imam, it's valid. Right? Because back to back, you're not facing the same direction. وَمَنْ جَعَلَ مِنْهُمْ ظَهْرَهُ إِلَى وَجْهِ الْإِمَامِ لَمْ تَجُزْ صَلَاتُهُ, whoever puts their back to the face of the imam, their prayer is not valid. Whoever puts their back, right, their back to the face of the imam, which means they're facing the same direction, right, their prayer is not valid, because that person is definitely ahead of the imam. And because since they're facing the same direction, ahead and behind applies. So if you're ahead, it doesn't apply. It doesn't count. The prayer is not valid. Right, so التقدم والتأخر إنما يعتبر باتحاد الجهة. Right. being ahead of the imam or behind the imam is only considered, or only counts, right, if you're both facing the same direction. That's the principle. But don't do weird things. Just make a saf, a regular saf, regular prayer. Imam is at the wall, you face the wall, but behind him. Yeah. The second issue is around the Kaaba. Now this is more of a daily practical thing, because this happens daily in the Kaaba at the Masjid al-Haram. You can watch it live if you want and see what we're talking about. How does the Imam lead the Salat in front of, around the Kaaba? Right. So first, the Imam can face the Kaaba on any side. Generally, there's a preference. You'll see that in Masjid al-Haram, that the Imam will stand in a specific place. I believe it's between the door and the opening of the Hatim. There's that place. I think they do pray sometimes other sides. Generally, the Imam will pray their Sunnah inside the Hatim facing the Kaaba. Right, inside that little outer part. So the Imam will face the Kaaba on whichever side he wishes, and the people will circle around the Kaaba, right? Now, if a person, say for instance, the Imam is near the door, right? So you have the Kaaba, right? Here's the door. The Multazam, here's Hajar al-Aswad, right? Here's the door, right? Say the Imam is praying here, right? Toward this side, right? And you're behind, right? People are surrounding the whole Kaaba around the Imam, right? Somebody's praying here. You're not allowed to pray inside the Hatim. It has to be around the Hatim. We'll talk about that in a second, right? But say you're praying on the opposite side of the Imam, but you are, right, as close as you could possibly be to the wall, whereas the Imam is a sufficient amount away from the wall. So technically, you are closer to the Kaaba than the Imam is, right? Right. However, closeness or being ahead or behind only applies if you're facing the same direction, the same side of the Kaaba. So if you're behind the Imam on the side where the Imam is praying, you cannot be closer to the Kaaba than the Imam is. Right? However, if you are on any other side, it doesn't matter. Right? You are still considered follower of the Imam, even if you're right at the wall of a different side. Right? However, you cannot be closer than the Imam is to the Kaaba on the same side as the Imam, if you are on the same side as the Imam. So that's a summary. So let's read what he says. He says that the Imam leads the prayer in the Masjid al-Haram, right, the sacred mosque. Right, the people circle around the Kaaba, right, and they follow the Imam in the prayer. If the follower is nearer to the Kaaba than the Imam on differing sides, it is valid. Right? However, if the follower and the Imam are on the same side, the follower must be behind the Imam, meaning it has to be further from the Kaaba than the Imam is. Right? And the criteria is the shins, the feet, the ankles, and the shins. Right? So if your ankle is ahead of the ankle of the Imam, then that's being ahead. Right? If your ankle is behind the ankle of the Imam, but when you make sajda, right, say you're taller than the Imam, right, and your head goes past the Imam, that's not what's considered. It's about the feet. It's about. The last is praying on top of the Kaaba. Right, praying on top of the Kaaba is valid. Now, the condition of a valid prayer is that you face the Qibla, correct? Right, facing the Qibla is a prerequisite condition for the validity of the prayer. What is the Qibla? Can anyone tell me what the Qibla is? What is the Qibla? Sorry, I didn't hear you guys. What is the Qibla? Sayyid Hamza?
Direction towards the Kaaba, or
to the Kaaba?
center.
Yeah, so what is the point of what is the direction facing? Like what are
The Kaaba.
the Kaaba? Okay. What if I'm praying in a plane? Am I facing the Kaaba?
No.
Why? Because I'm 33,000 feet above the Kaaba, and I can't technically angle myself downward.
Right.
Okay. What if I have a passion for the study of mythological trolls, and I'm like 5,000 feet below the ground in a tunnel that was supposedly dug by trolls, right? Where do I face when I pray? Because of course I'm going to pray, right? Even though I like trolls, doesn't mean I'm not going to pray. But where do I face?
The geographic location where the Kaaba sits, above all the way and extending below all the way.
Exactly. That is the answer. Right, so the Kaaba, right, indicates to the Qibla, but the Qibla is not specifically restricted to just that building, just to the Kaaba. Right, so if you're above the Kaaba, right, you can consider it as like the Kaaba, right, plus everything above it all the way to the sky, and everything below it all the way to the depths of the earth. Right, that is one giant, I forget, there's a good word for this. Like, you know those like alien abduction things where there's like a beaming light that comes down? So imagine there's like a beacon or a light that goes all the way up to the heavens. Right? That is the Qibla. Right? Right? So it's specifically the Kaaba, but it's the ursa ila sama, min al ursa ila sama, from the depths of the earth to the heavens. And that is where the Bayt al-Ma'mur is along that line. It's directly above the Kaaba. The Bayt al-Ma'mur is the Kaaba of the angels. Right? The angels make tawaf of it. Right? So that is the direction of the Qibla. So now we take the ruling. What if you're praying on top of the Kaaba? Right? So because the Qibla is not specifically the building, right? It is from the ground along the lines of the building all the way to the sky. Right? If you're standing on the Kaaba, you're essentially inside that beacon praying toward it, to some part of it. Okay? So in the Hanafi school, it is valid. It is valid because you are still considered to be facing the Qibla. In the Shafi'i school, it's not valid unless you have something blocking you. Right? You have a sutra. Right? You have something in front of you. Right? Because then it's considered that you're praying toward that area and not praying out, right? And far away from the Kaaba, and toward the direction away from the Kaaba. Right? But for us, it's valid even if there's no sutra. Right? However, it is disliked. It is disliked to do so for two reasons. One, standing above the Kaaba is a sign of a lack of ta'zeem for the Kaaba, a lack of reverence for the Kaaba. The fact that the Prophet commanded Bilal to climb the Kaaba and call the adhan does not mean that Bilal was commanded to do something that was disrespectful to the Kaaba. No, the prophetic command honored the Kaaba as well as Bilal, right? And that would, right? But that does not mean that I should go and stand on it now. Right? Standing on top of the Kaaba is disrespectful. Right? In one essence, it's a sign of a lack of reverence, right? But more so, the Prophet prohibited it. Right? The Sahabi mentioned that the Prophet prohibited us from praying in various places. I believe there's a number mentioned in the Hadith. I don't recall it. One of them is in a trash area, place where the camels and horses are kept, right? A place where animals are slaughtered. Right, and one of them is on top of the Kaaba. And the final one is on top of the Kaaba. So there's a direct prophetic prohibition on that. So, we reach the book of Zakat, Kitab al-Zakat. We're just going to mention in list form just a few things really quickly because our time is up. One issue that the scholars of fiqh they discuss is the arrangement of the chapters. The arrangement of the chapters. So, some books you'll see that the order of the chapters is purification, prayer, fasting, then zakat. However, Imam al-Quduri alayhi rahmatullahi ta'ala, as well as many others, have chosen to make it purification, prayer, zakat, then fasting. Okay. And those who chose to do it the former, right, they use the hadith that Islam is built on 5 things, right? Shahada at la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, right? Wa iqamat as-salat. Actually, the ones who do it this way, they use this proof. Wa iqamat as-salat wa ita az-zakat wa sawmi Ramadan wa hajj al-bayti man istata'a ilayhi sabila. That Islam is built on 5 things: testimony that there is no God except Allah, and Muhammad is His messenger, the establishment of prayer, and giving of the zakat. So in the order of the hadith, zakat comes before fasting, right? Then fasting Ramadan, and then Hajj of the house, whoever can make it there. Right, so there's a plus zakat and prayer are mentioned together in the Quran in many different places. I believe it's actually 28 places in which Allah says aqimus salat wa atuz zakat. Together He mentions salat and zakat. Right, awsani bis salati wa zakati ma dumtu hayya. Right, there's many places. So those are a few reasons why the order is chosen this way. So it's not incidental, right? There is by choice. So regarding zakat, the word zakat, right, zakka yuzakki, comes from a word that means growth, a word that means purity, right, and a word that means praise. So all 3 of these meanings are meanings of the word zakat. Linguistically. Now, regarding the legal zakat that we're talking about, all 3 of these linguistic meanings still apply. Right? So it still has to do with growth. Right? The Prophet said, "Ma yanqusu min al-mali sadaqah." Right? Charity does not decrease one's wealth. Right? It's a sign of increase in wealth to give zakat. Right? And these are the things that we believe in that are contrary to what you may think. Right? So it's Allah's way of teaching us not to be superficial and trapped in this closed-minded viewpoint of the world. Right? That there are things going on behind the scenes that you don't get, that you might not be privy to. Right? Zakat increases your wealth. Right? So the meaning of increasing is there. Purification is also there. The meaning of purification. Right? That zakat is a means of purifying the rest of your wealth. Right? And we'll talk about this in a second, right, regarding the prophets. Right? Why, right, about zakat and the prophets. Right? So this is the reason, right, because zakat is considered the wealth that was purified away from the other wealth, that the other wealth was purified from, it is not given to the family of the Prophet ﷺ, because it is awsakhun nas. It's the filth of the people. It's the filth of the people's wealth. And filth is not given to anyone who's honored as the Prophet's family. Right? As Allah says, right? إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. That Allah's intention is to remove from you all filth and to completely purify you, O family of the Prophet, O prophetic household. Right? So the impure wealth, so the wealth that is paid in zakat is considered impure for the one who keeps it. But the one who receives it, that's why they say that the hand of the poor, right, is like a miracle, because the hand of the pure changes impure wealth into pure wealth. Impure wealth into pure wealth. Even if a person, for instance, did fall into usury, they didn't make their credit card payments or something, and they had interest, right? Or I should make it the other way. They acquired interest somehow. I don't know how that would work, but they acquired interest somehow, and they want to get rid of it, right? So what is the path of getting rid of it? If you can't return the money to the people who gave it to you, then you give it as charity, takhallusan, right? Not, right, seeking reward, but seeking to get rid of it, to get away from it. But as soon as it lands in the hand of the poor person, it turns into halal wealth. So the hand of the poor person is like a miracle. It changes the impure to pure. Right? The impermissible to the permissible. So it's permissible for them. Right? But because it is impure wealth, it is considered the impurity of the wealth, the leftover. Right? It is not given to the prophetic family because it has the inherent meaning of purity. And the last is praise. Right? So the one who gives the zakat is praiseworthy. And giving of zakat assists one in removing blameworthy traits from their heart, such as bukhl, miserliness. Right? And each of the worships of Islam has an inherent effect on the heart that is sought by means of doing it, and happens to the heart when it's done sincerely, and not just out of a sense of obligation. Right? So the transformative effect of the prayer, we know there's many benefits, and the transformative effect of zakat, right? One of them is to remove the love of wealth, remove the love of worldly things, to remove or to instill the love of helping others, to instill generosity, to remove miserliness, and so forth. So that's the linguistic meanings of zakat. We'll talk about the legal definition of zakat, tamliku malin, right, in the next class. Right, so we just want to read off some of the points that we have here. First, the zakat has been mentioned in correlation to the prayer in 28 places of the Quran. Or salat and Quran are mentioned together. Salat and zakat are mentioned together. The second is that the zakat was made obligatory in the second year of Hijrah. So prior to that, it was not obligatory. I believe the scholars have mentioned that it's prior to the Ramadan of that year, right? Or prior to the obligation of Ramadan. Zakat is not obligatory on the prophets unanimously. Alayhimus salatu wassalam. Prophets do not give zakat because zakat assumes that their wealth has become, right, that there's some impurity mixed in with your wealth. So the zakat is to get rid of that. Whereas the prophets are free and absolved from ever having impurity applied to them. So none of the prophets are obliged to pay zakat. Right? Prophets give sadaqah, no problem. But this is unanimous, ijma'an, right, between the ulama. Number 4, zakat is obligatory as established by the, right? How do we know zakat is obligatory? Right? It's established by the Quran, the book, the Sunnah. Right? We already mentioned the hadith. Right? Bunya al-Islamu ala khams. Islam is built on 5 things. That's a hadith where zakat is mentioned, right? And the consensus of the ummah. So the reason why we mention this is because the obligation of zakat is qat'iyyu dalala wa thubut. It is definitively established, and it is definitive in its meaning of obligation. Therefore, anyone who rejects, right, the obligation of zakat, right, that is tantamount to disbelief. Right? Not paying zakat is a major sin, right, for the one it applies to, but rejecting its obligation is disbelief. And this is why Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he sent armies out, right, for the people who disbelieved in zakat. Right? There are about 3 different types of people at that time, and we're not going to go too much detail. There are those who said that we believe zakat is obligatory, but we're not giving it to you. We gave it to the Prophet, right? And we don't want to give it to anyone but the Prophet. Right? And then there are others who said that, nope, it's not obligatory. Now that's irtidad. Right? That's, right, apostasy, because it's disbelief. And that's the context of that situation. And lastly, right, we mentioned already, rejection of it is disbelief. But finally, the importance of zakat in society. Now, Islam professes 2 very, very emphatic things, right, regarding wealth. One, besides transactions, one is zakat, and the other one is no usury. Right? And if you really think deeply and analyze the reality, the cause of majority of bankruptcy, specifically in the US, but this is common now all throughout the world, is 2 things. One is usury, that those who are in debt continue to grow in debts, and they are not able to pay enough so that they can put a dent in that without it overwhelming them. And the second is a lack of medical insurance, right? Medical bills. The financial crash that recently happened not too long ago, right, is a clear result of, right, of a usurious system, right? Right. So if you remove usury, the rich are not getting richer without risk. And there's nothing wrong with being rich. There's nothing wrong with being wealthy. There's nothing wrong with buying and selling and trading and making a profit. There's nothing wrong with that. However, Islam stipulates that any transaction that you make has to be at your own risk. There has to be some sort of risk involved. If you buy a product and you want to sell them, you're taking on a risk. You're risking your capital wealth, right, in order to make a profit. And if you're smart, you'll do in a way that would rarely result in anything detrimental or any loss if you do it properly. Right? However, to make money on money without losing anything ever, right, that is not allowed. That is not allowed. Right? So, right, I'll loan you money and you have to pay me back more than that. Right? My loaning you money is a type of risk. Right? I get it back. Right? I should get back the exact same amount that I gave. I get what I put in, essentially. Right? I should not get more than what I put in without. So it's wealth acquired in exchange for wealth. And we'll talk about riba when it comes. It's more to it than that. Right? But what it does is it makes the rich richer with no accountability or no risk involved. So it's not earned, it's just gained. And then it makes the poor poorer without any way to help them out. Right? So it's not in the best interest of the society or the poor. It's in the best interest of a very few. And that is not what Islam stands for. We don't the disenfranchisement of the poor is not something. Right? It is something that Islam seeks to solve. Right? So, right, zakat prevents the building up at the bottom of the hierarchy of lots of poor people. Right? If you have any system of competency, there's going to be people at the bottom. Right? There's going to be people who are better than other people, essentially, which necessarily result that some people will have more money than others. You're going to have people at the bottom. That's normal, right? But to keep them down and it becomes too many people at the bottom and they're all impossibly stuck there and they can't get out, that's a problem. That's a problem. Right? That's not a matter of competence. Right? That's just a corrupt system. Right? So if we remove the interest, right, you don't have people who are stuck at zero constantly, or even negative. We should say most definitely negative, right? Because if you're stuck at zero, you can't climb the hierarchy. You can't move up in life, right? But so the zakat is to help those who are at the bottom to give them some leeway, right, to move up, which benefits society as a whole. Right? Because if the poor have wealth, they introduce that wealth back into the market, and then that wealth circulates, and everyone benefits. Every single person benefits. Right? Tamam. So it assists the poor. It specifically assists those who are in debt. Right? So those who are usury puts people in debt. Zakat brings them out, essentially. Right? But debt is normal. You make a bad business transaction, you lost. Right? So you borrowed some money from somebody, right, to make ends meet. Debt is there, okay. But Islam seeks to assist people out of debt. Right? It seeks to, right? It seeks to remove slavery, and that's one of the biggest aspects. Slavery was removed at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and one of the means was an encouragement to free slaves, but secondly, by zakats for the slaves to buy their own freedom. The indentured servants, right, which then makes them another person who engages in the economy and again benefits everyone. Now zakat it's seen as like an emergency fund. People are in problem, they get zakat, right? But before, zakat was more of it was not an emergency fund, but it was more of to raise the economic standard of all people. Right? So at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and then thereafter, especially the time of Umar bin Abdul Aziz, there was no one below the GDP. Right? There was no one at abject poverty. There was no such thing as abject poverty, and that was a result of zakat. Right? To the point where they had no one to give zakat to. They asked people, right, to find people who need zakat, and they would actually take the food for the wild animals that would come into the city. They would take it out to them, right, for some way to use this wealth. Right? And that's the effect of true of a zakat-based and no-interest society. That everyone moves up in the economic standard of living, right? And there's no excessive disenfranchisement of the poor, right? And there's no one in abject poverty. And really, if you apply those two things, right, that is the economic, mental, social, and spiritual social health of the entire world. So we'll stop there, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, and then inshallah next week we'll dive directly into zakat. And next week we'll dive directly into zakat and the rulings of zakat and the shar'i definition of zakat. So, wa sallallahu ta'ala ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.